The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law of Moses, we were commanded to stone such woman. Now what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
In our first reading from the prophet Daniel, we have a wonderful story of virtue. And we see various lessons. First, how justice prevails over evil. And it's because of the courage of Daniel, who came forward and defended this young woman who was in a position of weakness, vulnerability. Now, what stirred Daniel to do that? Her prayer. She would not give in to the evil that these two wicked judges wanted her to commit. She was a virtuous woman, and she knew the law, and she was going to keep it, even at the cost of her life. She knew that evil could not be done, even for some good. I mean, she could have reasoned that in this one instance I will submit to their advances because my life is important and I will be executed otherwise. But she said, no, I will trust in God. So she bears witness to the absolute nature of the moral law, that there are intrinsic evils that cannot be committed. And this is why St. Pope John Paul II, to use this story in his tremendous encyclical, The Splendor of Truth, in that wonderful chapter 3. Now, also part of this story is the fact that not only did Suzanne refuse to commit evil, then she prayed to God for help. She said, "Oh, eternal God, you know what is secret and are aware of all things before they come to be. You know that these men have given false evidence against me. And now I am to die, though I have done none of the wicked things that they have charged against me." So she appeals to God. Then God stirs up the spirit of this young lad, Daniel. But now Daniel has to take the further step of acting on what has been stirred up in him, this particular charism of wisdom that he did now exercise, and he used his wisdom to bring the court back into session and to bring out the wickedness of these two judges and their lies. So it's important to exercise the gifts that God has given us. As St. Paul said to Timothy, "Stir up the gift of God that is within you." For God did not give us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of courage and self-discipline. That's exactly what Daniel did. Now there's another lesson here, and that is that the judges represent the negative side of the two ways. They take their eyes off the Lord. That's what got them into sin. And they put them on this woman, and they lusted after her. And they certainly knew the law. They were brought up strictly under the law, and yet they took their eyes off God. That was their undoing. So let me quote again from that first reading. "They suppressed their consciences and turned their eyes from looking to heaven or remembering their duty to administer justice." Now, on the contrary, Susanna always kept her eyes on the Lord. Even when she was falsely accused and they bring her before court to humiliate her, what does it say? She looked to heaven. That was her disposition. She always looked to God. And that's what gave her strength. She never varied from virtue. There's a further lesson in that virtue exercised and the charisms exercised result in witness, because that's exactly what happened. We see that the whole assembly raised a great shout and blessed God who saves those who hope in him. So they were there witnessing this whole episode. And then Hilkiah and his wife praised God for their daughter Susanna, and so did her husband Joachim and all their relatives. So this exercise of charisms, this prayer, resulted in virtue being lived out, charisms exercised. As a result, God is praised and glorified. And that's what we're called to do as well in our lives, especially when we're tempted or tested, to turn to God. Finally, we have one further lesson, and that is that God uses current circumstances or trials to prepare us for future opportunities. And that's exactly what happened to Daniel. This young lad exercised the gifts God had given him, stood up and defended this woman, and that prepared him for the rest of his days, because we see what happened in chapter 1 of the book of Daniel and chapter 2 and 3, where he's in captivity and King Nebuchadnezzar is trying to seduce him by offering him to eat of the king's food and drink of the king's wine, so that he will come and be converted over to the Babylonian gods and serve them. But Daniel says no, and he prays to God, and he does not partake in the food of the king or his wine. And that prepares him not only to encounter Nebuchadnezzar, because he was a great, powerful king. Then God gave him further gifts, the interpretation of dreams, which he then did to Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar then raised Daniel up and his 3 friends into high positions. And then at the next king came Darius, and then Cyrus and Belshazzar, and Daniel continued to stand firm and to witness to God. And that's all because of using these current crises as a building block for future challenges. And that's what God does for all of us. So we're called to keep the faith and to rely on prayer and God's Spirit. In the Gospel, we see that although in today's first reading justice prevails over evil, Jesus extends that even further so that mercy now prevails as well, because the woman in the Gospel was not innocent like Susanna. She was guilty actually of adultery, and she was caught in the act, and the law was clear that she be stoned. But what does Jesus do when he's tested by the scribes and Pharisees? He comes to the woman and he says, "Sin no more," after challenging those who had accused her. So that's again the new law of love, this new covenant, and mercy is extended. That's what we're called to do as well, not to exercise justice in the extent of retribution or even revenge. With that, we ask God to give us the strength, like Daniel, to meet the challenges of our day and to act righteously. And again with Susanna, to stand up for virtue, because virtue has its aspect of witness. We see that in all the saints. John the Baptist, for example, he knew that he could not let King Herod get away with what he was doing, marrying his brother's wife. He stood up, challenged, and he paid with his life. But he's a witness. All of the saints. So let us thank the Lord for these beautiful readings. Let us meditate on them and be sanctified.